You think you're helping people. You believe that with enough patience, enough understanding, and enough emotional strength, you can guide someone through their darkness. When others walk away, you stay. When things get complicated, you lean in instead of stepping back. Somewhere inside you, there is a quiet belief that love means not giving up on people. So you listen, you comfort, you analyze their pain like a puzzle that just needs the right piece. And over time, something strange begins to happen. You become the one everyone turns to when their world is falling apart. The emotional anchor, the late-night therapist, the person who somehow ends up holding together situations that were never yours to carry in the first place. At first, it feels meaningful, almost noble. Society even praises people like this. We call them loyal friends, compassionate partners, natural empaths. But psychology sees a deeper pattern, because for many people, constantly fixing others isn't just kindness, it's identity. Helping becomes the role you play in every relationship. The thing that makes you feel valuable, needed, even safe. And without realizing it, you may start attracting people who always seem to need saving. But here's the unsettling question most people never stop to ask. If no one around you was broken, if no one needed your guidance or your emotional rescue, who would you be? But here's where the illusion quietly begins. At first, helping people feels like compassion. You listen when others are overwhelmed. You give advice when they're confused. You stay when their life becomes chaotic. And slowly, without realizing it, you become something very specific in every relationship. The emotional support system. You are the person people call when they're crying at midnight. The one who reads long messages about someone else's problems and responds with patience and understanding. You become the unofficial therapist in friendships, the stabilizing force in relationships, the one who holds everything together. And society celebrates this role. We call it loyalty, we call it empathy, we call it being a good person, but psychology often calls it something else, the savior complex, sometimes known as the white knight syndrome. At its core, this pattern is not just about helping, it's about identity. Your sense of worth slowly becomes tied to how useful you are to someone who is struggling. When someone needs your guidance, your emotional labor, your patience, you feel valuable, needed, important, and over time, that feeling can become addictive. You may begin to gravitate toward people who are lost, wounded, or emotionally unavailable, not because you consciously want chaos, but because those relationships give you a role to play. Without someone to help, something inside feels strangely empty, because when helping others becomes the foundation of your identity, a quiet fear begins to grow in the background. If no one needs saving, what place do you have in their life? One of the most subtle traps for people who constantly try to fix others is this. They rarely fall in love with who someone is. Instead, they fall in love with who that person could become. You meet someone complicated, maybe they're emotionally distant, inconsistent, or carrying a long history of unresolved pain. Other people notice the warning signs immediately. They see instability, avoidance, or chaos. But you see something different. You see the hidden story behind their behavior. You notice the moments when they briefly soften, the flashes of vulnerability, the small hints that there might be a kinder, healthier version of them somewhere underneath the damage. And that possibility becomes powerful. Instead of focusing on the person in front of you, your mind begins building a future version of them. A version where they finally heal, finally open up, finally become the partner or friend you believe they're capable of being. You tell yourself things like, they just need someone patient. No one has ever truly understood them. If someone really loved them, they would change. But what's happening psychologically is something much deeper. You are forming a relationship, not with reality, but with potential. And potential is a dangerous place to build a relationship, because it allows you to ignore the present. red flags start to look like wounds that need compassion. Destructive habits start to look like temporary phases. But here is the truth: many people learn too late. You cannot love someone into their potential. People only grow when they decide to face themselves. And no amount of patience, empathy, or sacrifice can force that decision for them. To truly understand why some people feel responsible for fixing everyone around them, we have to go back much further than their adult relationships. In many cases, the roots of the fixer identity begin quietly in childhood. For a lot of fixers, the home they grew up in was emotionally unpredictable. Maybe one parent had explosive moods. Maybe there was constant tension, criticism, or silent conflict lingering in the background. The atmosphere could shift suddenly, and as a child, you learned to scan the room carefully, trying to sense when something was about to go wrong. In environments like this, children often develop a survival strategy without even realizing it. They become the peacekeeper. Instead of simply being a kid, they start paying close attention to everyone else's emotions. They try to calm arguments, soothe upset family members, or behave perfectly so they won't add more stress to the household. Their nervous system becomes highly sensitive to emotional shifts. Psychologists sometimes refer to this pattern as parentification. Parentification happens when a child is placed in a role that normally belongs to an adult. Instead of being cared for emotionally, the child becomes responsible for caring for others. They might become the listener, the mediator, the helper who tries to stabilize the family environment. Over time, this experience can quietly shape the way the child understands love and belonging. The lesson they absorb isn't spoken out loud, but it becomes deeply internalized. Love is something you earn by being useful. Safety comes from fixing problems. Acceptance comes from making other people feel better. As that child grows up, these patterns don't simply disappear. They follow them into adulthood, often without conscious awareness. Their brain has learned to associate emotional chaos with responsibility. When someone around them is struggling, their instinct is immediate. Step in, help, stabilize. And strangely enough, calm environments can even feel unfamiliar. Because when your identity was built around solving emotional problems, a peaceful situation can leave you wondering what your role is supposed to be. Without someone to care for, guide, or rescue, there can be a quiet sense of uncertainty. The fixer wasn't born wanting to carry everyone's burdens. They simply learned very early in life that being the one who holds everything together was the safest way to belong. One of the strangest psychological paradoxes for people who constantly try to fix others is this: stability can feel uncomfortable. On the surface, most fixers say they want peace. They want a calm relationship, honest communication, and emotional safety. But when they actually encounter those things, something inside them can feel strangely unsettled. A healthy, stable partner might feel boring. A peaceful friendship might feel distant. A calm environment might even feel slightly empty. This reaction isn't because you enjoy chaos. It happens because your nervous system learned, very early in life, to associate emotional intensity with connection. If you grew up in an environment where love was mixed with tension, unpredictability, or emotional crises, your brain adapted to that pattern. Your body became familiar with the cycle of stress, resolution, and relief. Over time, that rhythm starts to feel normal. Psychologists sometimes describe this as emotional familiarity. The brain prefers what it recognizes, even if that pattern is unhealthy. So when you meet someone emotionally stable, someone who communicates clearly, respects boundaries, and doesn't constantly need rescuing, your nervous system doesn't immediately interpret that as safety. Instead, it may interpret it as unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel uncomfortable. Meanwhile, a person who is emotionally unpredictable might trigger a strange sense of recognition. Their instability activates the same emotional patterns your brain learned to navigate years ago. Without realizing it, you may feel drawn toward situations where there is something to manage, something to repair, something to stabilize, because in those moments, You know exactly who you are. You're the one who fixes things. Up to this point, the fixer can still appear almost heroic. Someone compassionate, someone patient, someone willing to stand beside people when they're at their worst. But every psychological pattern has a shadow. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we don't like to acknowledge, the motives and impulses that exist beneath the surface of our conscious identity. And for the fixer, the shadow is rarely discussed, because underneath the empathy there can also be something else quietly operating. Control. When you focus intensely on fixing someone else's life, you're constantly analyzing their choices, their emotions, and their behavior. You tell them what they should do, you guide their decisions, you try to prevent them from making mistakes. On the surface, this looks like care, but psychologically, it can also create a subtle power dynamic. You become the stable one, the wise one, the one who knows what's best. And in that dynamic, the other person becomes the one who is struggling, confused, or broken. This doesn't always happen consciously. Most fixers genuinely believe they're helping, but the role itself can create an imbalance where your sense of value comes from being the stronger person in the relationship. There is another layer to this shadow as well. When your attention is constantly directed toward fixing someone else's problems, you are also avoiding something important: your own internal world. Focusing on another person's crisis can become a powerful distraction from your own insecurities, unresolved pain, or feelings of emptiness. If someone else always needs your guidance, you never have to sit alone with your own questions. And there is an even more uncomfortable truth hiding beneath this pattern. If the person you're fixing suddenly became emotionally healthy, independent, and stable, your role in their life might disappear, which means, without realizing it, some fixers become attached not just to helping people, but to the very problems that keep them needed. There is another layer to the fixer pattern that people rarely talk about, because on the surface it looks so compassionate. Whenever you step into the role of the rescuer, a quiet power dynamic begins to form. One person becomes the helper, the one with clarity, stability, and answers. The other becomes the one being helped, the person who is lost, confused, or struggling. At first, this dynamic can feel natural. After all, people support each other in healthy relationships all the time. But rescuing is different from supporting. Supporting someone means walking beside them while they figure things out for themselves. Rescuing someone means stepping in and trying to take control of the outcome. Over time, this creates an invisible hierarchy. You become the strong one, the responsible one, the one who always knows what needs to be done. And the other person slowly becomes the dependent one. The problem is that relationships built on this dynamic are rarely balanced. If someone always needs guidance, advice, or emotional rescue, they may never fully develop their own stability. And the fixer, in turn, may begin to feel increasingly responsible for keeping everything from falling apart. There is also a deeper fear operating underneath this pattern. If the person you're helping suddenly becomes independent, confident, and emotionally stable, they may no longer need your constant support. And if they don't need you anymore, a difficult question appears. Will they still choose you? So without realizing it, some fixers hold onto the role of the rescuer, not just to help others, but to ensure they remain necessary in the relationship. When the fixer pattern becomes deeply ingrained, it often leads to something psychologists call codependency. This is a relationship dynamic where one person's sense of identity and emotional stability becomes tightly tied to taking care of another person. And once this pattern begins, it tends to follow a very predictable cycle. It usually starts with attraction. Fixers often feel drawn toward people who seem wounded, misunderstood, or emotionally unstable. There is something about their vulnerability that activates the fixer's instinct to help. It feels meaningful, even purposeful, to be the one person who truly understands them. Then comes the rescue phase. You listen for hours, you offer advice, you help them navigate their problems, defend them to others, and sometimes even absorb the emotional consequences of their behaviour. In the beginning, this can feel deeply rewarding. You feel important in their life, but slowly, the dynamic begins to shift. The more you give, the more you become responsible for maintaining the emotional balance of the relationship. Their problems start to consume your energy. Your own needs begin to move further and further into the background. Eventually, the burnout phase arrives. You feel exhausted, drained, sometimes even invisible. And when the person you've been helping continues repeating the same patterns, frustration turns into resentment. You might think, after everything I've done for you, but the painful realization is that many of those sacrifices were never truly asked for. And once the relationship collapses under that weight, the cycle quietly resets, often leading the fixer to another person who once again needs saving. At some point, every person who constantly tries to fix others runs into the same painful realization. You cannot change someone who is not ready to change themselves. This truth is difficult to accept, especially for people who genuinely care deeply about others. When you see someone struggling, your instinct is to help, guide, and protect them from the consequences of their choices. You offer advice, you show patience, you try to give them the support you believe might finally help them become the person you know they could be. But human change does not work that way. Growth is not something another person can engineer from the outside. No amount of love, sacrifice, or emotional labor can force someone to confront their own patterns if they are not willing to face them. And this is where many fixers become trapped. They begin treating people like projects, something that just needs enough time, enough effort, and enough care to finally be repaired. But people are not houses that can be renovated. You cannot buy a fixer-upper human being and slowly rebuild their personality with patience and guidance. Real change only begins when someone chooses to take responsibility for their own life. Until that moment happens, every attempt to fix them will only drain you while leaving the core problem untouched. Sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do is step back. So how do you step out of the fixer role after spending years, sometimes even decades, living inside it? The first step is learning the difference between supporting someone and saving them. Supporting means listening without trying to control the outcome. It means allowing people to make their own decisions, even when you worry they might make mistakes. Saving, on the other hand, means stepping in to manage their life, solve their problems, and carry responsibilities that were never truly yours. Healthy relationships are built on support, not rescue. The second step is learning to set boundaries. Many fixers fear boundaries because they worry it will make them look cold, selfish, or uncaring. But boundaries are not walls that push people away. They are fences that protect your emotional space. They allow you to care about others without losing yourself in their struggles. Another important shift is allowing people to face the consequences of their own actions. Growth rarely happens in comfort. People often change only when they experience the natural results of their choices. When you constantly shield someone from those consequences, you may actually be preventing the very growth you hope to see. And perhaps the most powerful step of all is turning that rescuing energy inward. Instead of trying to repair everyone around you, begin asking a different question. What parts of myself still need care and attention? Because the truth is, you are never meant to carry the emotional weight of the entire world. You are worthy of love, not because of what you fix, but because of who you are. If this video felt like it was describing your story, you're not alone. Many people are learning to step out of the fixer role and build healthier, more balanced relationships. If you found this insight helpful, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue exploring the hidden patterns of human psychology together. And I'd really like to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself trapped in the role of the fixer in your relationships? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. Thank you for watching.